Hey everybody, it's Tinderbox weekend and it's Saturday, May 24th. And I'm Mark Bernstein, the designer of Tinderbox. Hooray! We've had a busy week backstage. If you don't know the backstage program and you're not yet a member of it, go to the backstage page on the site and it's a lot of fun. And here's Michael Becker.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the meetup. So typical format of the meetup is we go around the room and new people introduce each other or people we haven't seen in a long time. Hi, Jim. It's been a while. We then we'll talk about any projects, things that people are working on, and then we'll jump into a theme. Now, we don't have a published, I'm sure we all have projects. I want to hear from that. But we don't have a published theme, although the combination between unpublished theme and project is what we're going to talk about today. In that Chuck Wade and I have been dutifully, along with Mark Anderson and Mark Bernstein support, been dutifully working on installer strategies to help people learn, figure out how to bundle up Tinderbox capabilities, not just for themselves, but others that they may be wanting to partner with or work with. So we're going to be talking about that today. Chuck's going to review his diagramming process, and I'm going to be reviewing one of my new modules that I put out. In addition to that, just in terms of theme, I want to call out that next week we have Lucas Vinemar who is an engagement engineer from a marketing development company, software development company called Agile Engine, and he is going to be reviewing a tool called AnyType, which has several analogies towards and like Tinderbox. So it'll be really fun to start comparing and contrasting his use of AnyType and how he uses it. In the preamble to our call, we were talking about teaching and the role he uses AnyType with his students to teach them data and data management. So it'll be a really, really exciting conversation around that front. Now, Mark Bernstein did talk about the backstage. I believe current pricing for that is about $95. The link is in the in the chat, and I can't begin to tell you how critically valuable the experience of the backstage is. At a very simple level, it gets you access to the incremental beta versions of the software that Mark rolls out in between releases. And we probably see a beta release version anywhere from once or twice a week to once a month or so. So you're constantly getting these updates and these tweaks. But beyond just that, the exchange with the backstage community, you get to learn software development, you get to learn problem solving, you get to learn product and feature scoping, you get to learn and experience that whole dialogue around getting to the messy edge cases of the software. And a lot of that's done in the backstage so that we're not necessarily confusing those out in the front end of the general community. So it's absolutely worth the investment, not just to getting access to the releases, but all of the education, community, and camaraderie that comes out of that process. Thoroughly encourage you all to do that. With that in mind, let's start with, does anybody have any pet projects they're working on, things they want to discuss? Comments that they have. And Bruce, maybe you can make comment on your newfound experiences of working with command line and some of the talks we went through yesterday.
Why do you do this to me?
Because it's fun. I enjoy it.
Okay.
Bruce on the command line.
Yeah.
Command line experiences. I know about this. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, just in the class we did yesterday, kind of your understanding now.
Oh,
lets you have access.
Command line Bruce.
Was that when you were in hyperspace and moving along at 104 miles an hour and I was trying to keep up?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh yeah. I'm gonna pass.
I know
yeah, no, you covered. Oh my God, was that only yesterday?
That was only
that's right. You covered a lot. No, you know what? I learned what bash is. I learned a bit about some Unix commands, and I am going to try to use Homebrew and see if, let's see, is Homebrew the one that I want to use to? No, Homebrew has a variety of utilities. That's right.
Right. Then that lets you install things like Pandoc and stuff like that.
Right, and Pandoc in particular, which is my elusive one. So I'm waiting for the recording on that so I can use so I can slow it down to about 1/16th speed and follow along with what you did.
Awesome. But again, that's one of the powers of Tinderbox is its ability to extend it beyond just the tool itself and interact with a whole host of other experiences, which is amazing. Art, you had your hand up, or did we just lose Art?
Oh, no, can you hear me?
There, yeah.
Yeah, I don't have a great connection. Okay. No, I was just going to ask about something that I'm looking at right now. I'm trying to put together a huge document with pages and build it out from Tinderbox. Is that something that's possible? Like I'll get page numbers and things like that on export?
Yeah, I can actually demonstrate that to you a little bit today. That will
Okay.
Yeah, I can give you an example of, especially within, well, it depends on where you go, which documents you want to go into. I mean, naturally HTML doesn't have page numbers, but PDFs and Word documents do. But I can,
Michael, just a comment. Are you recording today?
I thought we were. Are we not recording
Yeah,
yet?
upper right-hand corner.
Yeah, we're recording.
Oh, you know what? I'm so sorry. It was blocked by a message.
Yeah, we're recording. Okay. Yeah, so I can show you how to do that in a second, Art.
Oh, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, and then one other thing I was going to say right before you said that. Oh, it'll come back to me. Yeah, so that kind of page numbering stuff is fine. Something else I was going to say and I lost it. All right, it will come back.
Michael, I put in the sidebar.
I know there. Yeah, I know what it was. It was unrelated to page numbering. I wanted to show you something that I did with Jake Bernstein yet. So when we're ready for that, does anybody, Mr. Anderson, you had a?
I just said because it's really messy stuff. I'm very happy to. Basically, I'm revisiting. I promised my supervisor about 5 years ago that I would actually work up some of my research into a published paper, which was essentially a longitudinal study of bots in Wikipedia, which, suffice to say, isn't what you think it would be. Nothing is standard, nothing is complete, and it's really, really hard to document. So Tinderbox has actually been a wonderful tool, because anyone who, if you ever see one of those papers that we just took, you should have cause for doubt when it comes to Wikipedia. Not. I mean, the information there's fine, but it's just not. It's not a standardized system that you'd suppose viewed from the outside or from casual use. I only mention it because it might be useful to people in a general sense of thinking, I'm looking at something, I've got all this information, it's a complete mess. You know, what can I do? Anyway, so, it probably is a filler sometime.
So on that note, I want to put Bruce Gale back on the spot. Because it just gives me so much joy to do it. Bruce, your expert witness stuff. You had a great use case of your own personal experience. If you can kind of iterate how you've leveraged Tinderbox in the last week or two to facilitate the visualizations efforts for your expert witness stuff, I think that'd be really helpful for people to hear. And
Sure.
To follow on what Mark said about documentation and all of that.
I'd love to be able to show it, but without, changing out all the names to protect the innocent, of course I can't. But yeah, it has been this time around, and this is maybe the 5th expert case I've used Tinderbox for. And this time around, I mean, Michael's right. I got into first class from Coach, and it's been quite an experience. First of all, the organization of it. I've got a much better sense now. Rather than, I start off just putting my notes in and not caring what they look like. I try to keep them as short and Zettelkasten-like as possible, if you will. And I also don't initially know what my prototypes are going to look like, because it's actually different for each case. But clearly I'm going to have people. And then I usually actually want to know the relationship between people, so I'll create an attribute for that. I want to then know, in addition to the people involved, there's usually around it, it's a case about, personal injury, that kind of thing. This is involving a daycare center. There's about 40 alleged symptoms that occurred with this child under 5 years old, or that developed as a result of a 15-second interaction. So I've got the 40 symptoms, and then the attributes, and Michael was really helpful with this. We talked about linking symptoms to diagnoses. So how, and there's a couple of ways. I'm still playing with that. But once I've got my symptoms, I've got my people, then I've got my test results and test findings. And do those support the symptoms? Do they not support? So I've got these major categories, but the eye-opening part for me, frankly, was map view. I have always Map view is the view I go to when I try to use it and I can't find anything. And what I mean by that is, you know, it's not well organized for me. But the difference here was map view and links. Being able to see the relationship between the police reports and Department of Child Services and test results and family interactions, and having that all there in one big flowery blossom was just illuminating, and it moved me forward quite a bit. So that, and in terms of code, I mean, you all know me. I'm not using much, but I'm using OnAd. OnAd is, you know, is quite helpful to me. It's just really, and then the ease with which I can move around my data really is helping me just in terms of formulation. So that's kind of it. I mean, nothing pie in the sky, but it really, there isn't another tool, because many of you know that I like using spreadsheets a lot, and spreadsheets are inherently limiting. And, you know, you always need that third dimension, fourth dimension, and that's what I'm getting from Tinderbox.
Nice. Yeah, that was the assessment I want. Anybody comments, questions about Bruce's experience before we move on?
Well, I'd say be typing it out because I'm a rubbish typist anyway. It makes me think it's probably about 10 years back, but there were a number of lawyers, barristers. I'm not sure what the American equivalent is. Is that an advocate?
It's a word we use over here, but I can't say it on Tinderbox.
But suffice to say, these were people, and they were dealing with fraud cases and all sorts of stuff like that. You know, really complicated, lots of stuff. And I was just thinking, you know, Bruce's comment about just being able to see the relationship of the entities was massively powerful. So, you know, it just shows, you know, wherever you look, there are really, really messy bits of information. And just being able to begin to pull the threads together without having to force it into a rigid structure like a spreadsheet is remarkably powerful.
You know, Mark, to your point, what's interesting about it is that it's actually a deceptive process. At first, when I started off, I'm thinking, should I really be using Tinderbox? Should I really be going down this road? But the idea of just forging forward, and many people have said it, but not worrying about the structure in, say, the first half an hour. You just don't worry about the structure, because you can drag things around. You can move them quite simply. And if you get caught up starting with the structure, what I find is that actually interferes with the process of it. Because first, what you want to do is you want to accrue your information, and you want to get it in there so you have something to look at. So that's what I focus on. And one moment, something that is its own note all of a sudden becomes a categorical head for 15 notes that fall under it. And the idea of collapsing it, it just grows. I mean, that it actually, what's interesting is it actually makes the process enjoyable. And as I have another case I have to
I got to step away for 5 minutes. All right.
I have another case that I have to testify in a week and a half, and I've got a bunch of depositions to go through that came in at the last minute. To be honest, can't wait to get started with it. It just for me, I know that Michael talks about the publishing part, and he actually made an interesting point yesterday, which is that publishing also means preview. And that when you're previewing, you're really publishing. And he's created these inventive ways of being able to look at your previews. And sure, if you want a PDF or a hard copy or something, you can get that. But just looking at it as part of your analysis process is very helpful.
But I think also, Bruce, to put a face on, there's a term we often talk about, premature formalization. I think, and I'd be interested to see if this has been your experience. But you start by writing all the bits down, and then it turns out that the structure you thought it was, the relationship you thought it was, is probably incomplete, and actually not the structure you thought it was. Because when you actually start to draw the lines between it, you see, oh, there's more detail here and less there. So there are things that are missing that you need
You're
to
absolutely
find.
right.
Or there are things that are or they're conflictingly reported in different places. If you start from this corner of the map, you end up with a sort of relationship that's different if you start from somewhere else. And that is the messy nature of things, and all of them raise a question that you will have to work through to get to the end. Because obviously, for instance, if you have sort of a sense of two sources, two witnesses giving a very, very different take on the same story, that's something you have to resolve within your research.
That's exactly your you know, I have a particular story, and I have 4 different accounts. Only one of them is an eyewitness. Is the eyewitness account the accurate one? One would tend to think so. But you somehow have 3 more accounts from people who are quite certain of those spells, even though they never witnessed it. The other thing that, Wayne, if I could figure this out, I mean, I was just handed some medical records. You know, it's only 900 pages, no big deal. Uh, and and I guess Google now is getting pretty good at instant OCR. That when you put it up on Google Drive, you've got a live interactive document, and you can use the what I often use when I'm using the URL links now is I use that Google Chrome highlight feature. So you can drag a piece of text, copy that as a URL, paste that into the URL that you have in Tinderbox, and now what you have is a highlighted section. So especially in a 900-page document, what I used to do was I would do the screenshots and pasting them in. And of course, Michael would spank me for doing that, because then he'd tell me that, you know, I really need to put it in a separate folder and have control. And that makes sense, but I just want to get it done quickly. And but the missing piece is, if there was some way other than, I suppose, copy and paste now will do it, you know, of just getting that link text that is highlighted into Tinderbox without having to do a copy and paste, that would be holy grail. And it seems to me that eventually there's going to be a solution for that.
You mean the link text in a PDF or on a web page, or what?
Yeah, PDF.
What's wrong with copy and paste?
Nothing. Well, you know what? I obviously, when I'm copying and pasting, I'm taking the formatting out so I don't mess with Tinderbox. But sometimes the formatting is useful to have, especially if I'm quoting certain things that are legal and they're formatted in a certain way. So it's a minor thing, but no, you're right. Copy and paste is a B solution for me.
So Bruce,
I'm hoping someday for the A solution.
Here's my answer to your A solution, and we did this meetup about 2.5 years ago, probably. If you use a PDF viewer like Highlights, Tom Diaz has a good one he likes. You read the entire PDF document as you would, and you can color code with multiple colors, like people are green and symptoms are yellow, or, you know, and events are red, you know, just, you know, whatever, however color coding system you do. So if you think about your analytical process, complete your review of the document as you're doing it. What you then can do is we develop it depending on which of the PDF tools, you can either export, like if you're using Highlights, you can export those highlights out of the PDF document as a markdown file. You then can import that markdown file into Tinderbox and parse it, and then all of the notes then automatically get color coded. They get their links back to the original document, the URIs and back to the original document. And you can populate all of the related and, you know, attribute values associated with that activity.
Do you know, Michael, if Nitro PDF will do that? Because that's part of setup.
I'll check it out for you. But that
also back from, I haven't followed up with it as much, Mark. But you had recommended liquid paper, and I went ahead and got that some time ago. I liked it, but it seems to me they've made several changes since then, and I haven't. So I don't even know how much I can synchronize with the current version that I have or my current plan. But those are a couple of options. And yeah, you've mentioned Highlight several times. You know, the reality is that if I spend $50 on a tool like that makes a difference, that was money well spent.
Right. So for me, we've got a whole meetup. I'll recover around that. But you can have an end-to-end process from multicolor review of the PDF to it being completely parsed out into your Tinderbox document, all properly with all the attributes filled out, with all of the colors associated, with all the visualization you want. And the scripts are actually there already.
There is one other piece, and I think it's kind of it looks like I'm seeing a little bit in the chat. And one of the things that I also have noticed is that it's not a terrible thing sometimes that I have to either copy and paste, or sometimes due to the formatting, just rewrite it, because that's a brain process. And when you've written something, or in my case, typed it, I find that gets it into my kind of just my memory and thinking. It stores it somewhere that it doesn't store it when it's automated and I'm just looking at it. So getting my hands around it and slowing down just a little bit as I take in a certain bit of information has a bit of a heuristic value.
Sure.
Yeah.
And then, and remember too, this is something that Mark Anderson's preached forever. Is the Marshall Shipman paper, which I'll drop. The 1999 paper from that talks about the dangers of premature formalization, right? Or the emerging themes that come from formalizing stuff too quickly. You retard your thinking. So I think that's something we really need to keep in mind.
Yeah, I was going to think there's one other thing that because it might seem an odd, okay, you can have a fully automated, say, import of all sorts of very rich highlighting. I think the thing to bear in mind is that, and it goes back to the point about the intentionality of copy and paste, is if you, for instance, have worked through a PDF and you have very intentionally, with sort of some rigor, used highlights in a very particular way, then having a system that sucks that in is fine, because you've already made the decision is effectively encapsulated in the, say, the color of the highlight you've used. If you've just gone through and highlighted something and you have a process that's just sucked it all into Tinderbox, you still haven't done any of the work. So you had to bear in mind that the apparent upside, or the apparent gain in time, is not what it appears to be. I mean, it doesn't matter. I mean, I'm just making the point that one needs to bear this in mind. So in other words, the apparent saving is not always what it appears to be, because it may be you've just moved a triage problem from here to there. And that may be a good thing because you prefer to do the triage in, say, in Tinderbox rather than the PDF app.
Well, on that note, I mean, and how many of us have all fallen into this idea of the collection fallacy? I collect all this stuff and I think I'm smarter. You're not. You just created a hoarding mess for yourself that you have to clean up later, right? So, yeah, interesting. Okay, yeah. So let me look at it's Nitro PDF. I'll look at that while we continue the conversation, Bruce, and circle back to you.
Oh, thanks.
All right. Anybody else? No? Okay. Before we jump into Chuck, I've got something I want to show that's super quick. So Jake Bernstein, who is former state attorney general and part of our community, had reached out to me yesterday, and we talked about a project. And since grade school, he's been doing like Dungeons and Dragons with friends and stuff, and he's been like trying to figure out like how do I build campaigns using Tinderbox. So we were playing around with this idea of using chat, saying, okay, let me see if I can go up here to find the beginning of our story. Yeah, so here's the beginning of our story discussion, where we said, you are a dungeon master involved in domain play. I want a domain level issue like factions, armies, empires. I want to manage Tinderbox. Give me a list of prototypes and attribute values. Forgetting that, what I love too with chat is I don't have to worry about typos, and it just works. So chat spit this out, and we're like, okay, this is great, but now we got a general sense of what you're doing. I said, now name the prototype, P name, and set it up as a dictionary model. So what we started doing is we started driving down the path of getting chat to help us give us a pattern that we could reliably parse. And the pattern we were looking for was the name of the prototype, some delimiter, and then the structure of attribute name and attribute type. And so we spent some time going back and forth on that. And then that resulted to us finally getting a structure, a consistent, reliable pattern to be able to instruct through prompting what we wanted chat to give us. We were then able to then open up this file, and I'll go ahead and delete this. And I'll show you here. So essentially, the pattern we ultimately successfully landed on coming from chat was a prototype name, a non-offending delimiter in the concept of lists, a attribute name, colon, an attribute type, and and if you go down here, let me see if I can find the end of this list just to show you. Where's okay here, right? So this is a complete like prototypes attribute set we were looking for. And so when you're creating lists, you can lists are delimited by a semicolon. So you have to, in this interim step, you want to make sure that you're not introducing an offending character, aka semicolon, into a list that would break the pattern we're looking for. So then what we did, and this all took maybe half an hour, 45 minutes of messing around. We then created a stamp that essentially said, okay, go ahead and create the prototypes folder. Set the on add into the prototypes folder. Set its on add to is prototype equals true. Then from my list, iterate through that list. And the first thing we want you to do is, now that we're breaking up the list, change that I don't maybe Mark Anderson knows the name of it. I don't know. What?
Section mark.
Section mark. Yeah. So change the section mark into a semicolon. So that now gives us an individual list for each item. Give us a count. Now the first item in that list is going to be the name of the prototype. So we're saying, okay, grab that value, go ahead and create it. And now we then count how many items, how many attributes do we want for that prototype. So now we create a count array that says, now go and iterate through the rest of the list and create those prototype values. So by doing that, all we needed to do now was, do the prompts in chat to get the list structure we wanted, created the stamp, hit apply, and all of a sudden, all those prototypes are instantly made. All of their displayed attributes are there, and all of the attributes are done, along with all of their respective and appropriate type values. And that whole experience took maybe, again, 45 minutes just messing around and playing around with it. But now that we've got this pattern, this now becomes increasingly more and more reliable and more, and we get better and better at, prompting chat to give us the structured pattern that we want to then have Tinderbox parse this all apart for us. So I thought that was a fun and interesting interchange. I'll throw this up on as a follow-up to the community, so we have it as on the meeting. Now, and in terms of Bruce's comment, I went through that in lightning speed. Does anybody have any reaction, comments, questions about what I just reviewed? Or not really?
It's great. Thanks so much.
Yeah, pleasure. Okay, but again, it just shows you the ability to interact with different tools and create more and more facility with your thought leadership and learning management. Okay. Anybody else have any other comments before we move on to? We'll move on to Chuck, and then after Chuck, I will answer Art's page numbering question, and then we can move on to Mr. Anderson, but Peter's first. Mr. Peter, you're on mute.
Oh, why does that always happen? Okay, I wanted to update you on my little project that I said I was going to start last week, and that's trying to come up with a compact, scriptable way of doing notes on the fly. So what I set up so far, actually, let me share my Tinderbox file. Hang on, let's see, where's the share button? Okay, here we are. Okay, can you see that?
Yeah.
All right, very good. Okay, so here's what I did. I started off by writing a couple stack utilities so that I can add and subtract from the context that the notes are being taken in. And I have here current context, and it's just going to be a note that has a stack attribute. Now, my custom attribute called stack is just a list, and as I jump from one topic to another topic, I use the stack utilities to tack on a new nested context or to peel one off when I'm going back, so that the note value will always be able to point to the current depth that I'm at. then I also tried
So
to.
what are you, give me a theme of what you're reviewing here, Peter? I missed that.
Okay, the idea is that I want to eventually have a custom domain-specific language for note-taking, which is going to have a little hairy custom notation. So in order to support that, I'm coming up with a set of Tinderbox functions that will be able to take the output of that and use it to build and restructure a Tinderbox file on the fly. So I'm sort of writing an intermediate form representation of reified Tinderbox commands for building, linking, and modifying attributes of Tinderbox notes.
And so in some ways, it's kind of your own custom markdown.
Right, exactly. That's exactly where we're going. My own custom markdown, which is going to be meant for getting really deeply recursive and more terse than I would otherwise be able to do. So I have my little create note utility, and that's basically going to take a single attribute, which is going to be an options dictionary. And then inside of that dictionary, I have the note name, the container, the path that I want the note to be dropped into. And that's my reification of the note creation system. Then I decided that in order to simplify the note taking itself, I want to be able to use descriptors. And I came up with a descriptor set. So one thing here is sort of like mix-ins, where I can have little words, but the descriptor will be the equivalent of setting a value on an attribute. So, for instance, we have here red. And red is basically going to be a mix-in that corresponds to setting the value of color to my color in the description. So each descriptor is basically a term that could appear in my notes, and that term is associated with one or more attribute value settings. So I came up with custom attributes, an attribute called attribute, which is going to be telling it what attribute this descriptor is associated with. The mix-in is associating the value of that attribute with another attribute so that I can take advantage of the typed attribute editors. So we have in prototypes, we have our general prototype P descriptor, and it also has precedence. So if one descriptor is going to be more important than another, the thing will automatically sort them and can override. Since maybe, university person might assume that it's a student, and prof as a descriptor could say that you're not a student anymore. So I have the notion of an additive mix-in and a subtractive mix-in. And if it's additive, it can then go splicing a value into a list or a dictionary. And if it's subtractive, it would delete that value from a list or dictionary. So anyhow, for each of our basic Tinderbox attribute types, I came up with another prototype descriptor. This one, my color, so we have the my color color picker that we can use. And then date, we can use the date picker. Dictionary, are my dictionary, so that it'll handle the coercions for me. Then the descriptors themselves, I'm organizing as a folder under hints with a subfolder for each Tinderbox attribute type. So I have a folder for Boolean descriptors. If I drag something into that, that will give it the Boolean descriptor prototype. Color descriptors, here's red again. So we have our color descriptor prototype attached to it, which gives us our built-in Tinderbox attribute picker for color. Then we're going to say that it's an additive mix-in on tags. So it will add red to the tag value of the note that's being created and associated with red. And it's also going to set the color to my color. Then we can have a list attribute descriptor. Ooh, typo there. Let me... There, that looks better. Descriptors. Okay, so we have important. So this would be an additive to tags we would add the value of my list to the tag attributes. Then we'd splice in important and key as values in the tags attribute of the note that we're applying the important descriptor to. Or if we use the unimportant descriptor, it would become a subtractive mix-in, and then we would splice important out from the attribute. So I still have to work on automating this more, but that's sort of the descriptor. So I'm trying to do mix-ins, since it won't be changing the prototype per se, just using a term to fiddle with the values of multiple attributes instantaneously and shortened.
That's very cool.
So keep working on it.
And one thing I might want to recommend you remember, go back to the, was it Dickey a few months back where Mark Bernstein had commented his unique use of the onVisit function for changing those values based on context. That might be something you want to revisit and think about in your workflow, because I could see that being really helpful.
Oh, good idea. I'll go back and take a look at that. Okay, so that's why I've had progress-wise this week. I'll show you where we get next week.
Awesome.
And stopping the share.
Awesome. Okay, so Mr. Chuck.
Yes.
Okay. So what Chuck's going to show us is the work he's been doing now for like last 2.5, 3 months on an advanced diagramming view. We've already reviewed it a couple of times.
Well,
significant progress, but it's only available on Backstage right now, just so everyone's aware.
yeah, actually, the thing I'm really focusing on is how to manage packages, diagram view being an example of it, and trying to solve the problem that a lot of people had with the original version of diagram view that I put up, which was they found it hard to install it and put it in their documents. And so the problem that I will talk about in the context of using something like the diagram view is how to make it easy to basically share packages of Tinderbox elements, items, across documents in a way that's rational and easy for users to do on their own, as well as to share packages they get from other users. So that's what I was intending to talk about. And then I will show how the diagram view fits into that, and how it's able to leverage that kind of structure.
Mm-hmm. And by the way, that was both Jake Bernstein's initial intention with his Dungeons and Dragons project too, is he wanted to create an installer type experience package so he could hand it off to his friends when they were trying to set up their gaming evenings.
Right. And yeah, one of the things that I think will be an important test for the viability of this is how easy it is for people to use this for their own projects. You know, I'm trying to set this up so that it is simple enough and requires no coding to be able to say, I want to package up some stuff I have that I would like to put in other documents of mine in a consistent manner. And then I'll just go ahead and say that the other important aspect of that is when you then take this core set of pieces, items that you would like to have in your Tinderbox documents, and you update it in one document, and you say, gee, I wish I had those capabilities in my other documents. Then the same packaging procedure will allow you to update your package and then use the package to update any of the documents where you had previously placed it. So let me try doing some sharing. I apologize, I'm on a new computer with a new screen right now, so I may run into a few things that don't work quite the way I would expect them to. I'm going to try to get to the right. Hold on. All right, Zoom is telling me it may have to quit and restart. I did not get a chance to get this to set up. Let me see if I can do this now.
Yep, we can see it.
All right. Sorry about that. All right. Can people see this Tinderbox document over here?
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. And is it big enough that you can actually view it, or am I forcing you to get your magnifying glasses out?
It works for me.
All right, good. So this is an example of what I would call kind of a master document, something that you would build your packages in and set them up to be shared with other documents. Let me take a quick look at what's going on here. The only things I'm really focusing on right now are this blue document commons and the copy of document commons that's in red. And let me quickly explain what this is all about. If we're going to share packages between documents, there has to be some kind of framework in which to do that sharing. You probably need some place to put things like, oh, I don't know, some references or data sets that you use, or configurations as to how you want to configure your various items in your Tinderbox documents. So that's what we keep in the document commons. And it has 4 main sections right now. Global settings, which is just a place to put things that might be used, like, for example, with diagram, there's a note that keeps some information that the diagram view needs. We also have document attributes, because one of the most important features of building a package management system is it's not sufficient just to share notes. We also need the attributes that go with those notes that have been user defined. And so this is something we've talked about and demonstrated previously. This is a container that has a note for every single user attribute in this document. And we can open these up and look at them, and we can see the textual description. And you can sit here and you can edit that textual description in the note, and it will automatically be updated when you do when you go and look at user notes, and you went and looked, let's say, diagram ID, this text description will be the same as we have here. So this is just a way of including user attributes. And that's essential because we need the attributes to go along with the notes. So any user attribute can be defined as a note in this folder or this container, and it will be updated in your user attributes, and changes made to those notes will reflect in the user attributes, and vice versa. So the other thing this will do is, if you add this to an existing document, all the existing user attributes will get populated inside this container as new notes. So it's a bidirectional process. And that's the most complicated aspect of what we're demonstrating here, is just this ability to carry user attributes. All right. The next thing that I want to emphasize is packages. What is a package? Let me take a simple package. This is something I set up just pulling from one of my documents. So I work with networking network configurations, networking systems. So I have some functions and some tools that I use that are pretty common in just about any one of my documents for dealing with things like IP addresses and MAC addresses, which turn out to be a real pain in the neck to deal with from a string perspective. So I just have some functions that take care of them, and have some rather messy regexes that do the extractions I'm looking for. It's all the kind of stuff that I really don't want to have to keep re-implementing every time I do a new document, so it would be very convenient to bundle this stuff up. And so the network tools in this case is a package. And the most important part of the package is the manifest. The manifest has a series of containers that you'll recognize. Package settings corresponds to global settings up here. Action items would be the action items that you would have in your hence folder. at the level of the hints. And then you've got user attributes, which are in this case, just the user attributes that I want to go into the document attributes. So these are the ones that are associated with this particular set of network tools. Prototype items. In this case, I'm just setting some standard prototypes that I always want to have there in my document. I'm not doing any template items. Library items would be the functions. So I've got some functions that convert various flavors of IP addresses or MAC addresses into strings and canonical formats that are useful for me when I'm working with stuff. And I think most people have little pieces of prototypes or templates or so maybe some on-add actions and things like that they want to incorporate and put into the document. Stamps would be the other one. So any stamp here is something that would be part of the package. I will mention I've got link types. Link types are a little bit of a problem still in that although I can bring a link type over to a new document, if that link type needs any configuration, that has to be done manually through the document inspector at this time. And just for documentation purposes, I list here, just put in notes here to remind myself what dependencies this package may have on other packages. There's a to-do items here, which is something I use. It's nothing more than a collection of tasks. When I think of something, I say, oh yeah, I need to add that to my package, or I need to fix that function isn't working the way I want it to in that package. I just put some notes in this little to-do items so it stays with the package. And that gives me a little reminder, and I can then indicate when I've made the change or I fixed part of it, but it still have a piece that I need to fix, things of that nature. So that's just for my own note-taking purposes. There's also a documentation section, which in this case, I was lazy and didn't fill anything in. However, if you look at, for example, the diagram view, there's a fair amount of documentation here available to anybody who wants it. So the idea is that a package brings all the items that you would need to rebuild it in a new Tinderbox document, plus things like documentation and some references to what dependencies the package might have. That, in a nutshell, is what we would have for a package. Now, let me make one additional statement. For this package to be installed, we need to have an installer. So you'll notice there's a block of code here. And it's actually a lot of code, because what it's got to do, this code is going to go through each of these containers and take the corresponding items and do what is necessary to move them into the destination document. This is controlled by, as a rule, on the manifest. So a standard convention, and I'm taking a standardized approach as possible so that anybody can replicate this easily. You don't need to know how this installer app works. You just need to know how to stick the right things into the right buckets, if you will, in the package. And then when you click on the rule disabled, and you basically by unchecking it, now the rule is enabled, it will run and will immediately set itself back off again. So if I click away and come back to it, it should have set itself back on. And I may not have that actually set up correctly at the moment. But that's the fundamental idea, is that that's all you take. You don't have to know what the code is. You just have to know how to click this on and off to install the package. So that's, in a nutshell, what a package is. There are some other things that we need to make this all complete and work correctly. So I have some standard functions that I'd like to have incorporated in any document, but these are the things that are associated with allowing the packages to be able to operate. Because I'm concerned about sharing packages, if I'm going to share something like the diagram view with a bunch of people and people run into problems, I would like to have them have the ability to turn on some debugging tools and to get a log result, set of log files that I can then look at to see what went wrong. So thinking in terms of how does a package developer who's going to share their package support that package when it goes out into the hands of other users, we want to think about having some basic tools around that can be used not just by the package developer, but by somebody who's using the package to perhaps help with debugging or finding problems or dealing with other issues. So there's a little bit of that included. However, the whole concept is to keep this document commons section as simple as possible, just barely enough. Yes. Somebody started to say something? Okay. All right. Now, that's so far just a rough outline of how this is set up. But how do we actually get this started? And so now let me take, let me do something to create a new document. I'm going to add a note. We'll just call it top. I'm going to go into outline mode just because that's a little bit easier to see what's going on. And maybe I add another note, name document. Doesn't matter, just, you know, a basic document. And now then what I want to do is I want to shift this a little bit here. I want to come and take this element here, and I'll explain what this is a little bit more in a minute. I call this the red pill, for those who know what I'm talking about here. And this will be the blue pill. So we're going to take the red pill. We're going to copy it. So all I'm doing is I guess I have to use the edit menu. I'm going to do a copy or Command C. And I'm going to go over here to this document. Doesn't matter where I put it. Doesn't matter at all. And I'm just going to do a Command V and paste it in. Bingo, bango, boom. The red pill became a blue pill. It became the document commons. And it is now the last document in the structure. What's more is it will stay that way. So if I up here just add another top level document and I try and put it at the end, it won't let me here. It will automatically be shoved up and the document commons will go down to be the last item. There's a reason for this, and that is that we need, if other packages are going to be able to find some common places to put things, they have to know how to get there. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to set this up so that, first of all, this is out of your way. So it's always at the end of your document. It's not going to be in your way. It is a separator so that if I go and look at the map view, I don't see the document commons. It's not in the map view. And the reason is because I set it as a separator. So this is as simple and as unobtrusive as we can make it. The process that I just went through actually took all of the items in these packages. So the debugging, logging, the user attribute, the diagram view, network tools. This package template here is just something for you to create new packages yourself. It doesn't actually install anything. It's currently, I guess you could say it's neutered. It's just there as a template for building up a new package. And I'll just mention that anything that gets moved around, anything that gets replaced, is going to wind up in the discards container that is the last item in this document commons. And anytime you can come along and you can just toss the entire discards. No problem. Now, if I look at hence, you will see that first of all, there are some items that have been added. Just for the record, I tend to like to have some organization. So I have a separator here to show that these are the action code library items used for edicts, on visits, on paste. These are some core elements that need to be here to make some of the other things work. The library now has a bunch of functions in it that have been set up and should be ready to work. I've got a series of stamps that have been added to this as well. And if there are any taggers or highlighters or anything else that needed to be brought in, they will be added as well. So what went on here? What went on was when I brought in that red pill, the copy of the document commons, there was a section in there, I'll go back to this, which is called the essentials. And the essentials looks a little bit like a package in that it has these same containers that hold various things, but these are the things that we need to be in the base level document commons. And at the end, I have some add-on packages. And here's where we can say, I want to include the diagram view, and I have a stub installer that will basically go into this package's container here, find the diagram view, and run its installer. Same thing for the network tools. Same thing for if this were actually a real package, it would run that. So what happened here is that when I copied this over into the new document, this ran automatically as a function of an on paste. So the mere action of pasting it, there is an on paste code set here. It's actually it's a bit long, but it's there, that ran and began to start this process, figured out what the basic context is, what needed to be done, and then invoked the installer that's part of the essentials. The essentials installer then started going through installing all the pieces that it found here, and then went to the add-on packages, where it then looked to see, well, runs another installer, which is just for installing the installer, the add-on packages, that then runs installers for each of the add-on packages. So you can bundle up a whole series of packages, if you will. If you have several packages you like to use in your documents, you can bundle them up into this one copy of Documents Commons and install it freely. Now, the interesting thing is I can copy this again. So I'm going to go up here, just be very clear. I'm going to copy this. I'm going to go back to the same document over here. Doesn't matter where I do things. And I'm going to paste it. This time, all it did was run through that same set of processes, but this time it knew it was already installing where the document commons was in existence. And so what it did was it went through and it looked for anything in that new copy that is newer than what's in the current document. So it goes through a whole process of finding everything that's in the current package, comparing it with what's currently installed. And if it's got something which is newer, it replaces it. Anything that got replaced gets put into, you guessed it, the discards area. So nothing is destroyed, nothing's broken. And in fact, the entire copy of documents gets stuck into the discards because it won't be needed anymore. Everything is already moved where it belongs. So this is this ability to update your packages at any time. So for example, if I put out this diagram view and you decide that's something you like to have, you use it in some of your documents, and then a couple months later, I might put out some updates, say, hey, I found a couple of bugs, I fixed them, I added some new features, I added a snapshot capability, which is something I've been thinking about doing, and you say, gee, I'd like to get those features added in. Well, you could use something like what I just showed you, and either install the package just by itself, because now once you've got the documents commons, you can come in and add a single package, or you could perhaps pick up something like the this entire installer system and install multiple packages all at once as one process and have everything update accordingly. So that is the essence of all of this. If it looks like, there's some stuff here that's a little bit complicated, that's probably because I'm explaining, and perhaps poorly explaining, how this stuff works. But the reality is, all you need to understand is how to structure a package. And we all know what prototypes and actions and user attributes and template items. And so we all know what those things are. The only little gotcha is you'd need to have this document commons installed first to be able to get user attributes that you can pick up as notes and put into your package. That's the only prerequisite. So you'd probably want to install this red pill first, and then be in a position where you can take your user attributes, collect them, and put them into your package. Other than that, should be no coding involved, no having to understand how all the magic works. I won't say that it will be perfect, but it should get you most of the way there. Let me point out one other thing that I think is important here. When I go over here and I look in the logbook section, you will see that there is an installer log. And so every time you perform a package installation, a single package, or you drag one of these, this red copy of document commons into your document, you're going to get this very extensive, detailed listing of exactly what happened. So this first part is going through the essentials. What got copied from the essentials into the new document commons? Then we get to the end of the essentials installer, and I go into the installer that is going to look for all the add-on packages. It sets itself up to activate the installer for diagram view. It starts a stub installer, which then starts the real installer, and the diagram view got installed. You can see exactly what's going on here. This note with this name is being updated, moved into place. If something is replaced, you will see, instead of saying moved into place, you can say, you will see it was replaced with, and the prior item is put into the discards container. So all of that information is there. Again, it's boring stuff. Why is it there? Because if something goes wrong, you could send me or someone else you were working with this installer log, and they could maybe look at it and say, oh, I see what didn't happen. That's basically the idea. So again, I'm trying to inoculate the package management system against the things that can go wrong. And to do that, I provide the ability to do debug logging, and I provide the ability to keep track of how the installers run. The installer log, by the way, does not use any functions. This is all built into the code itself, so there's no dependencies whatsoever. Once I install functions like, if I go in here and I look at something like get a commons notes ID, here's a function, a very simple function. I'll explain what this is in a second. But this is a function so simple, I don't need to do any debugging. Here's a function which is quite a bit more complex. And so I might want to do some debugging. But again, in this case, I didn't set anything up. However, if you're looking at any of my code and you see these if debug, logrec, logbook, that kind of annotation, that's where I build into my code the logging. And the only way this runs is if I take this debug variable and set it to true, at which point I will get an extensive log. Now, the only reason I'm explaining that is just to say that when packages get built, if they get elaborate, if they get complicated, and this would be an example of a very complex function, then if you're going to fix problems later for yourself or for others, it's probably a good idea to give yourself a few hooks that give you some idea of what's going on. Are things working the way they should? Put up some information that will give you a hint if things have gone off the rails. That's not something you need to deal with unless you're doing coding yourself, so don't worry about it. But it's the kind of stuff that I tried to build into this framework so that supporting packages would be feasible. The other thing I want to point out is that I was fairly careful.
Chuck, real quick, where's that logging tool again in the library?
The logging tool is right here, record log entry.
Got it.
And there are also some stamps that are pretty handy. So you can stop logging. You know, if the logging starts running away, you can just click on the stamp and it'll run it, and it will immediately actually just go up to your stamps item and you say logging, stop logging, and it will just immediately stop all logging. You have a stamp that just create a quick bookmark entry. You can make this is mostly for testing, a stamp log, just a general stamp log entry. You can restart the index sequencing for log records. Every record gets an incremented number, an index, so that you can always see the order in which things execute, which when you start getting into the way this installer works, where it's invoking multiple installers in a cascaded effect, having an index tell you, what order in which things executed was fairly important. So those are just some stamps involved with that. Down here would be where I have some stamps involved with the diagram view, things like that. And here's a few stamps I use with my network tools. All of those got installed automatically by the installer. And there's, so where do you figure out how to use the log rec tools? Well, you come down and you look at the packages, and there's a debug and logging tools. And right there is a README. And then there's a whole lot of documentation, probably more than you would ever want, on all how to go about using it, examples, things of that nature. So there's, I try to do a lot of documentation, if nothing else, for myself. The other thing I'll quickly point out is that I have this habit of starting out with documentation before I write code. And that is interesting because it gets me to, think about what I'm trying to do. But it's amazing to me how much this stuff changes. So way back when I first created this concept of some kind of shared repository within a document, a Tinderbox document, even before I used the term document commons, I started just writing notes to myself in that container's text field. And I just kept updating these as I've gone along. So this is actually, if you want the underlying details of what's in the document commons, the most obvious thing to do is just go and click on it, and there it is. It tells you what's in there and provides some details and explains some of the attributes that are used, things of that nature. Again, not something that you probably normally need to know, but it's there. The other thing I want to emphasize is I'm sensitive to the fact that not everybody in the Tinderbox community is an native English speaker. And I think it must be kind of rude for us English-speaking people to always imply that everybody else has to use our terminology. So if you have a different mother tongue you prefer, you should feel free to come in here and change the names of these items in the documents commons and the subfolders to whatever is comfortable for you. The way I deal with that is I actually use the subtitle to tell me what it really is. So the subtitle is my real hook. I have to have code know when I'm dealing with the right thing, but this is what people see. So why pollute this with an English language bias? I can hide that in the document commons, and then somebody can come along here and say, I don't know, call it something. I have no good facility with other language, so I'll just say global store. And everything will continue to work. It won't affect anything. And I want to point out one little thing here. For people who write applications or write packages that involve code, here's something I recommend you use. It's a simple function. It has a single call. And by making the document commons always be the last top level container, this top level note in the entire document, I could refer to it in this interesting way. If I look up here, top is the first item in the outline list. It's also known as the cover, which is a carryover from story space. The last sibling of the cover is the document commons, even if it's called global store. Doesn't matter. I have in this document commons, I have a dictionary. The dictionary maps all the things that are in the documents commons to IDs. So that if you use this function here, you can provide it a commons name like package or package dash diagram view if you want to get to the package for the diagram view. Put that name into, feed it into this function, and you will get back an ID for that container, which you can then use to reference it within your code. If you want to get its path, you can get its path. You can do anything you want to with it. So this is a way to build code that doesn't have to know all the document structure. It just has to know how to get at the things that are in this commons area. And here's the tool for doing that, making it easy to do that. I've probably given people more information than they ever wanted. I wanted to try and emphasize that this is intended to be easy to work with and simple. I think the only way that you'll convince yourself of that is to try it. This currently requires the latest version of Tinderbox. So unless you have access to Backstage, I would suggest holding off a little bit. I will post this in the main forum as soon as the next version of Tinderbox comes out, which will have everything be able to work. The one area that definitely does not work at the moment with the 10.1.2 is the diagram view. And I would suggest you not even try and run it with that version. That has been fixed and it has been thoroughly tested with the latest release candidates that are in the Backstage environment. If you go to this document, which is what I would release, there is also a playground where I have a bunch of just notes for playing around, and you have a diagram that you can take a look at, and you can come over here and you can see how notes are reflected. The main improvement, and it was a significant effort to get the diagram view working the way I've always wanted it to work, is I had to deal with a lot of edge cases around reflecting links from the main document into the diagram. So all of these links that you see here are copies or just basically duplicates of links that exist in the main document. So here's the main document in a map view. For the most part, links aren't visible that go between these notes. There's a bunch of links between these notes. But when we add these notes to the diagram container, and you go over and then look at that in map view, all these links are updated automatically. If I do anything to cause a link to not show up. So for example, if I look at this note here, there is a reflected link types. And if that's empty, it will use a default that's associated with the diagram. But if I were to do something like, say, only allow disagree, you notice that link just went away. If I, oops, I did not mean to do that. If I just clear that, that link actually came back. So you've got a lot of control within the diagram over which links show up, how they show up. You can have links that are between notes. So for example, I could take this note here and I could run a link from it to this one. That link exists only in the diagram. It does not exist back in your main document, whereas all of these other links have been copied from the main document, including this interesting edge case of where you have a bunch of links between note A3 and note B3. Those can't be the same link type, but as long as they're different link types, it is possible to have parallel links like this. And so the logic of diagram view now handles turning on and off each of those individual types of links, reflecting them appropriately so that they actually show up as parallel links, reflecting what's in the main document. If I go over here and just
So Chuck, how would we distinguish between a link that's only available in a diagram versus the main document? Could it be a different color?
You're fooling around with link. The problem with link types is they are universal. So a link type is going to apply to the link wherever it is. So I can't just I can color a link, but then I'm going to color that link type everywhere. I think the simple answer is it's a link that will stay in the diagram, but it won't go away. I mean, it's not associated. You can always go and look and see. So for example, I come back up here and I look over here in the diagram. I created this ad hoc link between note B1 and note C3. If I look at note C3 and look at its links, I can see that there is this link from B1. That's in the diagram view. If I go over to here and I look at this, I don't, again, I've got, make sure I got links showing. That link does not show up. It's there, but it's not there. Excuse me. Did I do that right? Yeah. So note B1 has a link to note C3. But in the main document, there is no such link.
Yeah, your point being though, there's no way to, like, because of the way the universality right now, there's no way to make it locally different. And so you'd have to kind of go through that heuristic you just walked through.
Right. And I'll point out one other little thing, just so people don't get caught by it. There is an issue with link management. So right now, the installer can bring over the two link types. So when you install the diagram package, you will have the link types diagram note and diagram reflection note. So these arrows are indicating the direction that these links go in. However, you have to use the inspector. You have to go to the white square, select links, go and select diagram note, and you then need to turn off visible, turn off labeled, and then you need to copy that code there and place it in there.
So the reaction, Mr. Bernstein.
I was just going to say that's the only hook that has to be done manually when installing the diagram view. Everything else should work automatically.
Real quick though, before you close that, also Mark Bernstein, I can't see you if you're still with us. I noticed you selected the link, but the drop-down box doesn't have the name there. So, okay, there we go. Yeah, it does. All right,
yeah.
got it.
It's just flipping back and forth. I messed up the view a little bit, but it's a little subtlety.
Yeah.
When you're setting it up, it's the only manual step, and I think at some point in the future, it is likely we'll get that fixed. I've been looking for a workaround. I just haven't found it yet.
So, Chuck, if I understand correctly, the underlying point being that so link types are global, and there isn't currently an action code operator that allows you to make a global change to a link type. You can settle these flags for an individual link using each link, but you can't do it for the link type as a whole.
No, you can't set them. You can only you can make a link get copied from one document to another. The link type will be copied, but none of its characteristics. Yeah. The only way I'm not aware of any way to set any of the characteristics through code. So I can't set the visible flag, I can't set the labeled flag, and I can't write into the action section the one piece of action code that I need.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's lots of these things because we really didn't have the need for it until now.
Yeah, and you know, that's why patience is a necessary virtue with this stuff. You know, I started out by just saying, is this even feasible? Could I do a diagram view? And I originally thought, oh God, this is going to be a pain in the butt. And I did it, it wasn't so bad. And then I said, oh yeah, but I got to deal with that edge case. Oh, I need to deal with that edge case. And what would happen if that happened? And there was 3 months of work getting all that straightened out. And at this point, I would say I'm probably 95% or more there. I should, you know, just quickly, I'll just mention one other thing because I know some people will appreciate it. One of the things that I do, and this illustrates how to use the document commons. I'll stay here for the moment. I have global settings, and in global settings, I have a diagram settings. And again, I document in the container what's going on here, what it's for. But if I go to my stamps, there is a diagram, set active diagram. And if I just go and run that, watch what happens with the show view. It says, I haven't selected the diagram container. Oops, let me select a diagram container. Now when I go to here and say set active diagram, it now tells me that I've got an active diagram. And when I come and look here, there's the active diagram, there's its ID. Now then, I can do, and I can come over here and I could select, let me add another node in here. I can select this node. Oh, let me just do another one. And I'll put one up here as well. I can now grab that note, command click. I selected 3 notes. Now I can go to my stamps. And without playing any of that silly game that I showed previously of showing, you know, running a link from a note to the diagram, I can come here and say add notes to active diagram. And if I slide over, there they are. So a fast way to add notes to a diagram in bulk. So a lot of people, I think, will find that that's just an easier way to add notes in general. The other way, of course, to do it, to come over here and do something like select this and drag it to the diagram container like that. Select the link type to be diagram note, and then create your link. I'm not going to do it because I just added it.
Yeah. So Chuck, real quick, what code are you using for it to know what notes are selected? Is there an action code or operator that says, you know, collect selected notes? I don't think I'm aware of that.
No, all I did was, okay, so the operation is I select a note.
Oh, and then you're applying the stamp. Yeah, got it. Okay.
No, then I select another note. Then I select another note.
And then you apply the stamp.
They're all selected. Now the stamp, when I apply it, it's going to apply it to each
That's how you get the
of those notes.
Yeah,
And because I set up I said, what is the active diagram at the moment? It goes into the active diagram, which I think will work well for most people. That was an improvement I know I think other people had asked for. So again, I just am illustrating again how there's an interplay here between the way a package works and how you use it, how it gets set up with all of its functions and elements, but also, there's a standard place to put things that we need.
Yeah. So
and
okay,
yeah, go ahead.
I'll keep going.
No, I was just going to say, I know that with the other projects that I work on, I wind up having tables that are very useful, that are, lookups, information I pull from other resources. Maybe it's some references, or it's functions that I find handy to work with. Maybe it's that I want to be able to use a run command to go out and extract something from a piece of network equipment and pull it back in. Where do I put stuff like that? Well, it's just handy to have a common standard place for those interim things to go. Or even things that are meant to be permanent, like a table that I want to keep looking up, dictionaries that I want to build and support. Having just, something like a global settings, knowing it's there, and that I can put a container or a note in here and then use it consistently, and know that if I move it to another document, it'll all still work the same way. That's what I'm trying to achieve. And hopefully this will be easy enough that anybody can use it. We'll see. I'd love feedback.
Awesome. So on that note, I know we're running out of time, but I'd like to show an alternative, not alternative, but merging our two strategies for installers and kind of talk about similarities and differences if we can have a few minutes. Let's give people some comments. Anybody comments on what Chuck's shown? Okay, I think it's wickedly cool. Given that we have a few minutes left, and Art, you're still here, and I'm going to use this as an opportunity to both show the installer strategy as well as demonstrate the same concept. So we have limited time, so I'm going to just kind of go through this relatively quickly. But here's a similar problem that Chuck was trying to address, in that you have the files you need and the elements you need for getting that file installed. What Chuck is calling packages, I'm doing something similar here. Here are all the package files that would need to be done in an installer, similar to what Chuck is doing using the rule triggers. In terms of sticking the library, rather than sticking that out into a file, I stuck all of my installer code into a rule that kind of hides it away and keeps it from getting accidentally messed up or accidentally deleted or something of that nature. So a lot of similar ideas. And one of the things that Chuck and I and Mark Anderson and I have been talking about offline is how do we as a community come together to standardize some of these concepts? Not necessarily to say one is wrong versus another, but are there some standard language around triggering the installer, using on paste, Chuck's logging stuff that he's been talking about, that was really important. I love Chuck's example of the non-destructive, what did you call it? Trash, what was the name of the
discards?
Yeah,
discards.
The non-destructive discard file. There's so much that Chuck discussed with us that if we can come up with a kind of best practices for installer punch list, that it could say, if you're building an installer, either for yourself or somebody else, here's some things to think about. So it would be really fun to pull those ideas out of that. But to show you an example of what that works is, if you then, similar to what Chuck showed with us, if you go ahead and paste this in. Now I'm not using the automatic trigger. I've added one level more of friction for people just to trigger that response. And by doing that, the installer now installs. Now, and I got the right one. Now, Art Curran, you still here?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So you asked about doing, adding page numbers and possible footers to documents. Let me show you. let me show you an example of this too. So this library I've actually published up on YouTube, and even Paul Christie commented too. This is the benefit of what Chuck and I have been talking about. Paul made a comment just 8 days ago that said just grabbing somebody else's Tinderbox file and then being able to do it for his work is just enormously beneficial for him. So that's kind of a nice example of doing that. And
Cool.
when this is done, installing, similar to Chuck, I have a pop-up show that will come up and say, if you try to use the tool, it pops up and says, wait a minute, you've got to populate some of the global variables that are missing. In this context, it's the PDF, your documents directory, and the pandoc files. So for my file, let's just grab those real quick so I can copy them over. So here's my pandoc path. And again, there's some things that you can't, put in the installer because they're going to be local to that person's environment. And that's where you just gotta have to explain it in the documentation. Export directory, there we go. Okay, so now that I've got that installed like that, I have the ability to have my documents. So let's say you write a project or a document or a paper. In this context, I have this 5Cs article that I've written. In this particular file, it's all about publishing. So I can go ahead and create the draft.
Michael, you are awesome. Your draft is ready.
Okay, and
Great job.
I've done the attributions, and so you could personalize that for yourself as well. So if you change the name to Art, right? And I can go ahead and publish a new draft.
Art, you are awesome. Your draft is ready.
Right.
Great job.
So it gives you the ability to personalize those activities. So now I've got my published article. And again, part of the reason why I'm combining it all into one standalone document, there's a whole bunch of reasons for when you're using, especially for academic purposes, when you're using citations and such like that. Now, here is the standalone published document and article with the associated references being rendered in the document. Now, how do you go about doing PDFs and headers and footers? Well, in a HTML documents are continuous long listing documents, so they inherently don't have a footer concept to them. So in the world of if you're using Pandoc, for example, to generate a document, you would have a reference document, and then that reference document would have the headers and footers in it. And then, so when you publish to Pandoc, you're telling Tinderbox, hey, Tinderbox, let's go back to Tinderbox. You're saying, hey, Tinderbox, when you publish that document, use this reference document as your Word document, and then that's how you would pull up the headers, footers into the Word document. And when I was developing this process, I also found this. So let's go ahead and say like Art Currum, parentheses, space, parentheses, poetry, and we could say TBX project. Now, what's interesting about this, there is and this is at the beginning of the call, we talked about plugins and command line tools. And when I was developing this, I found a Wheezy Print. I found a command line tool that enables you to print to PDF. And it's an open source command line that you can install in from Homebrew. And so when you do that, watch what happens. So I've got this document. I go to my export directory. Okay, and just to show you that it can happen in real time. So once you've written your document and you put in your headers and footers like this, I go ahead and click is export to PDF.
Art, you are awesome. Your draft is ready. Great job.
Okay, and that article is now going to get exported to my PDF environment. And here is the article that we just exported. And when you open it up, it automatically is sticking your headers and footers into the document, and it's all with page numbers, and it's all permanently formatted. And what's interesting about doing that with this method, what's fascinating is the way the PDF, the Wheezy Print methodology is doing is it's using a custom CSS. So it looks for the @page CSS, And what I did in my template here is I added some styling functionality. So I said, iterate through all of the CSS documents you want to import into the document. So similar to what Chuck was doing with global variables, I have both global variables or local variables where I could be telling the tool what CSS documents I want to be using for this file. And then if you scroll down here, when that gets published, you'll see down here in the CSS, here is that custom CSS that got inserted into the page. And then that custom CSS is what's getting parsed out and then put into the headers and footers of the document. So this is, now the great thing about doing installers is you don't need to know any of this code. All you'd need to do is write your article. If you were using this module, you write your article, you fill out the variables for what you want to have in your header and footer, and then hit export, and it's done.
Art, you are awesome. Your draft is ready. Great job.
And then I go ahead and hit export, and now
Art, you are awesome. Your draft is ready. Great job.
and I've just exported. And that's the value for the community of having installers like this is, Chuck and I will have spent 3 or 4 months writing the installer, and then you get to launch a paper in 10 minutes.
Can say thank you so much. Yeah. Okay, I'll give this a whirl. Thank you.
Yeah, so that's the
so tell me something, like if you're going to use CSS to insert a page number, then it's theoretically possible to have a cross-reference. So in your text, if you say, please look on page 4.
So Max asked for me to demonstrate this, and I'm glad you brought that up. So here's the next module. Hopefully I have this released by Monday or Tuesday. But and this is significantly more work. But if you look here, so here's an article, and I've written an article, right? And you'll notice as I'm writing the article, I'm populating the attributes. Here's terms, here are people, here's entity names, here are citations that I'm using in the article. And let's say in this particular program, I'm not only writing an article, I'm also writing several books. And this book has part numbers, this book has chapter numbers and sections, this book has chapters, this book only has sections. And so what this glossary and library is for glossaries, indexing, and automatic numbering. So this library will then let you number all of the figures, number all of the tables in your document, number chapters, parts, and section headings, regardless of where things get in the document. But here's where it gets really cool. Let's say I go down in my terms directory, and I have multiple projects referencing that same term. So book parts is using the word is in the preface of book parts, the term gracias. The term gracias is also in the 5Cs article, and it's also in the output software part of the 5Cs article. So you're able to using link types to determine which project in this Tinderbox file that term is being used by modifying the heading of the term document. Now, when you actually when you then want to actually create an index, when I'm creating an index, I only care about the term that in its context of used within that article versus in that book. So what this methodology does is it goes in, and the agent essentially goes and triggers a function that says, go look at your parent document, pull out all of the attribute values, and similar to what Peter Wasilko just showed us earlier. I don't know, remember what you called it, Peter? Something kin? Your multiple attribute values. So here, see, I've got index.
I think you said mix in.
Yeah, so I call the index attri, right? And so here I've got my authors can be in multiple attributes. It can be an author attribute or an entity attribute. Author entity or entity attribute might be that, or entities. People might be authors in person. Citations could show up in either citation key or index citation key for various strategies. So I'm able to have multiple attributes pulled from multiple values pulled from multiple attributes in a article or book to be able to create an index. And then in the process of doing that, now this is where it gets really, really interesting. Then when you use templating, I can say, well, what if I want to just get a table of the terms that are used in that particular article? Now, what I can say, well, what if as part of that article, what if I want to include the text of that term? What if I want to include the citation associated with that term? What if I also now want to include the index of that term? Where is that term actually showing up in the article? Now, this is where it also gets interesting because you start managing context. When I render the indexing of that term, because this is an HTML document, because I'm sitting here only looking at the index, I don't want these hyperlinked, because if I click on them, there's nowhere to go. There's no anchors in an HTML document for it to be able to go. But if you look at the index from the entire templating of the document, go down here, you'll actually see that these now are actually linked, because now we have a hypertext, and so I can now move around and navigate the document from the index.
Right.
So that's
Great.
the other part of it. Now, where it gets really kind of fun is the next piece. Well, what if I don't want to be rendering my index as a table? What if I want to render my index as a list? Now I've got a list. What if I want to render my index as an alphabetized list? And then these are all generated from functions. And then also when you go down here, you can render images. And if I had an image that was locally stored, going back to the comment that Bruce made, I could actually be showing a thumbnail here, which I don't currently have. And again, you can turn on and off the different things that you want to include in your index. And then depending on strategies, when you output your end report, what that allows you to do is then to have an appendix that shows you one type of index, a different type of index, different type of table. So I can actually manipulate and change the input-output of the indexing, glossaries, of the automated numbering, at will. And
Very cool.
And again, another couple, I don't want to even imagine how many hours it takes to, and as Chuck duly pointed out, it's not the base level capability that's the hardest thing. The hardest thing is all the edge cases. Like, what happens if somebody does this? What happens if somebody does that? What happens if somebody tries this? And invariably, and that somebody is often myself. I'll do something and break.
Sure.
Oh, crap. Okay, I got to deal with that now. And and so then you end up thinking through all of those different pieces. But that's another example of where these libraries can come in. And now I can demonstrate one more thing. The other thing that we need to work on when we're doing this is, let me probably pull up the untitled document we just created, is the, where's the untitled document? Here it is. So here's the document we just created. Now, the other thing I'm playing with my installers, which was a big discussion in Backstage, is how do you actually have a onboarding strategy, right? So start here, and here are the 7 steps that you need to do to get this up and running once you've installed this file. And then in my publishing system now, I have about 6 different modules. Another module I have is how to work with media. So this is my media file. And so then what you do is you copy that over, just like Chuck, you bring this in. We don't need the attribute launches. And we'll say now install on top of this the media file. And so now I've got both the media library and the publishing library. And here's an example of things that are hard. Like, I'm still struggling sometimes on making sure that that stuff gets in the right hierarchy. So you notice how this start here, unfortunately, made its way down here when I really wanted it up here. So that's some of the tweaks that I still make. But that way, and then I also had, you can then show, here are all of the different libraries that you've been installed. So as you start installing multiple files on top of each other, you'll get which library has been installed in this particular file and what's its version. And then I'm gonna borrow some of your logging ideas too, Chuck, because I think that's gonna end up being really helpful as I start updating and modifying these. But this gives you another example of how these libraries are working. And on that final point, Mark Anderson, if we can kind of close out today, when you and I had our weekly meeting on Thursday, you gave us a kind of a 3-part view on the approaching of this, the documentation ideas of it. And if you can kind of close us out,
okay,
in your observation of what you saw Chuck do, what you saw I do, and then what the average muggle user will do when they're out there in the
well, I sort of put in a note earlier, but I mean, really to pay testament to I mean, and I know from sort of other documentation. It's much more work than you think at outset, because as I think we saw when Chuck was working through his demo, and indeed yours now, is that it's not just enough to sort of know what it is. So, because from the user's perspective, first of all, then knows, why on earth would I even want to use this? What does it do? You know, why should I waste 5 minutes, half a day of my time doing something with this? So that's one thing you've got to explain. You've got to explain how to install it, which hopefully that bit you only have to do once, but it needs to explain to someone who didn't build the thing what they have to do, and and arguably, you know, things not to do that they might otherwise naively do. At that point, you can then address the fact of, okay, well, now you've got it installed. Where are all those things you promised? Which button do I, you know, because that's what we're trained to do by most software. You know, where's the button that gets me the reward? That's what I want. So again, you need some quite general documentation. All right, well, if you want to do the listing, or you want to do the diagram reflection, you need to go to this bit. And then the level beyond that is you know, some of the stuff Chuck was showing us, because some people will want to make changes, or your future self may want to remember in 6 months' time how the thing worked. So that's the real detail, which probably most people won't use, but needs to be there.
You're being gracious. 6 months? How about next week? What did I do last week? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's worth mentioning, simply because, you know, if one sits down to say, oh, I'll just write myself a package, there's a lot that one can learn from looking at this. I think the thing that that will probably come as a surprise is that even if you didn't think you needed some documentation, you do for yourself, if no one else. And it's as much work as the stuff you probably thought was the work.
Well, and on that note, Mr. Bernstein commented on this. I guess back in version 5 and 6, they tried to build for Tinderbox some of these tutorials, some of these pre-canned examples. And if I recall the stat, he said it ended up taking about 50% of the development time or more to build these use cases and maintain and establish them. And just think about it. You know, I've built 5 of these libraries. Chuck's built his diagramming view. Between the two of us, that's like 3 months each. That's 6 man months basically worth of work, or people months worth of work. And you've only got Mark. So what do we want him to do? Be building out these use cases, or actually maintain the fundamental tool itself? So that's part of the calculus of all of this.
Oh, one other thing, just quickly, because I remember this touch on our conversation, is also the fact that one of the things that's quite difficult to do when you're building the thing is to describe it, because it becomes very difficult, the deeper you're into it, to remember, in a sense, what you just know, you know, what's obvious and therefore not described. And so, you know, over the years I've been doing ATV reference. An interesting sort of long correspondence I've had with sort of Mark is because sometimes it's not until you stand outside the development of it that you can say, oh, this thing only makes sense after you know the following, which is not explained anywhere and is unguessable. And it's not that anyone's hiding something, it's just that you sometimes you sort of need that extra thing. And that's one of the challenges also in writing the documentation, actually. Unless you know, hopefully you'll find people, you know, for the sake of asking, who will look at it and probably tell you the bits that just were unguessable at first contact.
Yeah, and if we think about it, in commercial companies, there are whole departments that's all they do is documentation.
Not anymore.
Okay, but there should be.
They ship it all to India.
Yeah.
And they're still trying to figure out what it is they're supposed to be documenting over there.
My company has a department dedicated to this, and they got the same problem, figuring out what they're supposed to be documenting. And the quality of the work they've done has gone downhill over the years.
Yeah,
well, I think there's also a difference between the documentation, you know, going back to much older computer science, you know, the stuff you when you were building the whole thing yourself as well, you really need a lot of instructions to sort of explain where you get to where you are. But nowadays you almost need two sorts of things. You need there's a technical description, but there's also a user description, which comes from a very different place. It's a description for someone who has no interest or requirement to understand how the thing is built, but actually has a very, very real interest in knowing how to use it. It's the surface of it. And that's where I think a lot of documentation sort of falls down somewhere down the gap between the middle and deals with neither very well.
Yeah.
Interesting. In the marketing context, I've got 2 examples on that. I was talking to the head of marketing for United Airlines one time, and he said, you know, we need to, when it comes, and this is marketing is essentially a documentation function. One of them is top level customer is, I just want to go to point A to point B. That's all I care about. Give me information on that. The next level person is, you know, what's the best seat on this particular type of plane? What food do you have? What entertainment's on the flight? That's the kind of the second middle person. And then the third person is who's flying the plane? What's his or her history? You know, they want the history of the of flying, right? And you kind of have to kind of go in that. Think about that level of waterfall hierarchy when you're thinking about this type of documentation. And on a similar note, when you're marketing, you're often talking about the funnel, and in the upper funnel, you're saying what information we need to do so that people are aware of us. And then marketers typically jump all the way to the bottom of the funnel to then explain how do we do it, because we put so much work into this, we want to show you how we did it. And often where most marketers fall flat is in the middle of the funnel, where they're actually talking about this is why we're different and why you should care. That middle differentiation explanation is often missed. And again, it's all it's all a methodology, a process of documentation. Interesting. All righty. This was really fun today. And what I loved about today's session is the broad spectrum of projects, if you will, that we were able to cover and discuss. And so that's a pretty neat thing. Any other final comments, thoughts, questions? Art, Kim, I saw some thumbs or hands up or something happening earlier. You guys, you good?
Yeah, all good. Great demos. Thanks so much, guys.
Great stuff, man.
Great,
awesome stuff.
great progress.
Hey, when
Yeah.
is your book coming out, by the way? Do you have your book coming out, Michael?
Mine, not
The
really.
5 Cs?
No, and the problem is my book might get put to the side because I'm currently negotiating doing a ghostwriting book for somebody else, which I would not be able to do were it not for Tinderbox and all of these templates. And
Well, can we buy you a copy, maybe?
what?
Is it for sale? I can buy a copy.
Yeah, eventually.
Okay.
Not done yet, but we'll get it done hopefully by the end of the summer.
Have a good week.
All right, everybody. See ya. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.
That was fun.